Hello, everyone. My name is Alan Herrera, and I am the editorial supervisor for the Association of Foreign Press Correspondents in the United States. That's AFPC-USA. And I'm here today to discuss our latest episode of our Foreign Correspondents Talk Series 2024, where we meet with foreign correspondents and get the opportunity to hear their stories, and they can share their insights with all of you, aspiring journalists or not. So here today, I have the wonderful Venezuelan journalist Valentina Oropeza. She works for BBC Mundo, which is the BBC's Spanish language news service. Valentina covers migrant issues and human rights issues, including abortion bans and other matters such as reproductive health restrictions across the United States. And she and her team recently won a Best Spanish Language News Feature Emmy for their documentary Águilas del Desierto, which, well, uh, covered her expertise with migrant issues. And she can, of course, elaborate on all of that. So all of you can get to hear what she has to say. Hello, Valentina. Thank you for being here with me today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Alan, for having me and for giving me the chance of talking about the issues that I like.
Oh, of course, of course. This is such a wonderful opportunity for me as well. I always learn a lot doing these interviews, so thank you again. I would just love to give you the opportunity to just tell all of us a little bit more about your work, and just some of the stories that you've worked on recently. Could you share with us?
Yeah, sure. Well, I arrived to the U.S. recently, if you like, in January 2022. When I arrived here, the war in Ukraine was about to start. And I remember that it was very interesting to see how nobody could believe that something like that would happen in Europe at this moment of history where we are, right? So from that moment on, the world has changed a lot. And what we do in BBC Mundo is to tell the world to Latin American audiences, either people that is in Latin America or they live in the US, Latinos in the US. So our challenge is to try to tell a story that makes sense to global audiences, to people that might live in very different contexts, and to provide them the information, the accurate information enough to make them, to allow them analyze and to form their own criteria, right? So over these 2.5 years, I would my main focus has been migration, and I have seen a huge change since I was living in Venezuela until 2022, and coming here may allow me to see the regional impact of the Venezuelan crisis that I spent so many years covering in my home country. And it has been very shocking to see how this crisis has had so many consequences, not only for the US, but for the whole region, due to the amount of people that are fleeing the country since a decade ago now. One of the main issues that I have covered is how the migrants reach the southern border of the US and they attempt to get into the territory, right? So it's been very moving to see the stories of these migrants, not only Venezuelans, of course, we have Mexicans, people from Central America, many people fleeing from Ecuador in the last month, but also people from such far away places like China or Africa. So what I would say is that what has been more challenging for me is to try to understand the situations that the migrants are coming from and the trauma that many of them might live over the road to reach this place, and then to see how the American audiences or the Latino audiences in the US perceive this issue, right? And we have to remember that we are in an electoral campaign, right? So this is also a very important issue of discussion. So I would say that I've been learning a lot about this, about like getting that balance on getting in touch of the reality of a migrant that is coming from something completely different from what is happening in the US, but also to see how the local communities in places like Arizona or Texas or even Florida, where I live, how they perceive migrants and how the arrival of new people change the dynamic at the social and economic level.
That's fascinating. And you you have an understanding of what is absolutely a very complex issue that many Americans don't seem to have as much of a grasp about. Certainly in Congress, in Congress, it is of course a major issue that you hear about all over the news. What would you say to the average American, out of curiosity, who wants to know a bit more about this, but just has a little bit of trouble, I guess, wrapping their head around the concepts involved?
Yeah, I would say that it is very important to get to know the story of the migrant. And I would make an example here. If you have someone coming from Venezuela, I have report on this story many times. You have a migrant that has crossed 7 countries by foot. They have crossed Colombia, Panama, Guatemala, Mexico, Honduras, Guatemala, Mexico, and then they arrive to the US. Over that path, many of them have lived many abuses. They have been brought up in the Darien Gap. Women have horrible stories about being about raping and abuse and being abused. And when they arrive here, they have to start a new life, like completely fresh. And something that is very moving for me is to see how the migrants achieve to cope with those realities that live inside them at the same time. All the things that you left behind, your family, your job, your history, many of them are fleeing from political persecution, from violence in their countries. And when they arrive here, they have to, like switch their minds because they are in a completely different reality, in a completely different society. Many of them don't even speak enough English to get to know what they have to do with their paperwork with migration. So my point here is that I think journalists can help us to build more sensitivity and more empathy regarding what these people are living, but also how the local communities in the US are seeing these new people arriving, and how what the question that I make to myself all the time is, how can we allow to build a bridge between two persons that don't know each other at all, meaning US audiences and the migrant communities coming, and how can we find those bridges, those points where you can relate to another human being just by being a human being, not because of your nationality, not even because of the language you speak. And I think that's the challenge that we're seeing not only in the US with the migration crisis that we're having in the Americas, but we're seeing the same thing in the Middle East, for example. We're seeing the same thing in Europe with the Ukrainians coming or people coming from Africa. The thing is, how can we understand each other in a different way that allow us to live together, to integrate, and to get the best of each one of us at the same time?
That is, it's a tall order, as they say, because of course we have so many politicians, for example, again, to get back to that, who are capitalizing on very harsh language, very harsh language. There's very racist language that, that is employed. It's very dehumanizing. And it gets back to what you were just saying about empathy. When this is all you hear, when you hear this rhetoric, it can be so difficult to bridge that gap. So, what can you tell me, like, what is it that you keep in mind? What is it that you keep in mind when you come to work every day? Because, you work for, the BBC, it's Spanish language news service. The BBC is, of course, one of the largest networks in the world, with so much influence. So you have this really great, very useful platform. So I'd love to get to know, like, how do you approach, your work every day, knowing that you have to just, you're handling a lot.
Mhm. Exactly. I
Yeah.
think that you gave me the right word, being useful. I
Mm,
ask myself, how can I be useful in this situation? And it is also very important for me to tell you that I am Venezuelan.
mm,
And that gives me a different feeling of this situation, because many of the people that are coming in this influx is coming from my home country.
mm,
So the thing is that when I go out to report on a story, I question myself, and I ask myself, how can I be useful on this? Doing my job the best way I can. And the first thing is to listen to people, everyone. It doesn't
mm,
matter if the person that I'm interviewing is discriminating someone. It's not for me to judge that. The thing is that I need to grasp as much information as I can in order to understand the person that I have in front of me, but also the context that I have in front of me. And I have to be able to tell this story for, as you're saying, not only Latin American audiences or US audiences, but also British and European audiences, because our content is also published in London for UK audiences, of course. So,
mhm,
and that's why that would bring me to the documentary that was awarded in the Emmy recently. We told the story of a group of volunteers that go to the Sonoran Desert to search and rescue missing migrants. These people work out of the compassion and out of humanity, because they even spend their own money on these operations. I mean, they doing this because the pain that they feel by knowing that there are people dying in the Sonoran Desert made them move in order to help. So when you see that, many of them are Mexicans, most of them are Mexicans. A few of them are from Central America. Some of them have lived the same experience in the Sonoran Desert 30 years ago or 20 years ago. So when you see that, you can see that you don't have to be another actor in the violent speeches or rhetoric. You can be an agent of understanding and of empathy, and I think that journalists should be on the service of that. So what I try to do is like to step aside and say, okay, there are many situations that I see that as a citizen or as a personal individual I don't like, of course, but what is the most useful thing that I can do here? How can I contribute to make this more accurate or easier for people to grasp,
mm,
to understand? So I try to focus on that.
mm. I think that's great. And the other thing is that from what I'm getting from that is that in committing yourself to that, you're also helping society become more well, certainly more understanding, but also more equitable. That there is room for,
Yeah,
these new people can be here and they want to contribute to society. Yeah, that yes, they're fleeing, many of them are fleeing these very frightening situations, right? Political
yeah,
persecution and
mhm,
this and that. But at the end of the day, they're not your enemy. And it is such a
yeah,
shame,
yeah,
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 to see this language. And I know that it is an uphill battle, for you and other journalists. But the story that you just described of these people who are going out there into the desert themselves
yeah,
to just try and search and find and just help these people. That's a story that I'm very sure, of course, right, that the average American, is not hearing. So
yeah,
it's not only important that you told it, but the fact that you won, that you and your team won the
yeah,
award for it, like that must have felt
yeah.
like just a wonderful culmination of your career thus far, I imagine.
Yeah. Actually, it is. You made me remember. There's a story that was very shocking for me when I was reporting on this. I
Mm,
went with them to the Sonoran Desert 3 times. We walk with them. Those are like very long operations. You have to walk maybe 9 hours in a day to see if you
mm,
find someone. Sometimes they find people they're not looking for. Sometimes many times they find bodies. They don't find the people alive. But sometimes you can find migrants crossing that they are still alive. So they provide them with water or assistance in order deliver them to border patrol to be deported back to their countries, right? But the thing is that one of them was an American, and he told us the story that he's living in Arizona right now, but he's from Iowa. When he went to Iowa, the first time that he spent a few months working with the Eagles of the Desert, and when he went back to Iowa for Christmas, I think, he started to telling the story of what he was doing to his friends and his family. And his best friend from school answering him, why are you doing that? Why are you helping those migrants that are invading in our country? And he was so surprised that he achieved to open a conversation with his friends and his family on all the ideas that they have of how threatening the migrants were. When he started explaining what he was doing, at some point these people realized that they were making a mistake. And it was, like he's someone of his own circle explaining the thing, because he has lived that many times in the desert. So that's why I'm telling you that I think that every story that we can tell with empathy can make that someone connects to a different energy and to a different way of thinking the reality. And I think that is so powerful from journalism, and especially from social media and all the platforms that we have in our hands to do our job.
Yeah. No, it's fascinating. I feel like we wouldn't be in this field if we didn't genuinely believe in the power of communication and sharing ideas. It's vital, it's vital for society, for people. And I'm very curious to know, considering the type of work that you do, you're covering these very impactful stories. Could you share with me perhaps, just tell me about some challenges, that you've faced while starting your work in the United States? You're here in this new country, how did you adjust to being here in the United States? And how would you describe your first impressions and observations of the country overall?
I'm not sure that I have adapted, completely adapted yet, but I'm trying.
Yeah.
But what I can tell you is that I think that one of the most challenging coverages that I have had in the US is the abortion bans in the States after the decision of July 2022. And the thing is that when I start covering, as we know, after the U.S. doesn't have this federal protection on the right to the abortion, each state can decide how the abortion is going to be managed, right? And what happened is that each state started to approving different laws, approving different restrictions on limitations on doctors, on patients, and on how to deliver this health service, right? So one of the most challenging for me aspect of these coverages is to understand that at some point in the US, the states are like small countries inside of a big country. Because when you see, for example, the legislation on abortion in Texas, it doesn't have anything to do with New York. It doesn't have anything to do with Iowa, or it doesn't have, you really have to see how, even though it is the same country, how the perspective and the understanding on these key issues is completely different depending on the area of the US that you put your focus on. Creating those maps with a team of visual and images in the BBC, in the first place, allowed me to learn the geography of this country, and I'm very happy for that. But also, it let me understand that this is such a complex country, and it's not. When you have like when you see the national landscape, of course, you have like very main issues that they repeat everywhere: the economy, the migration, or I don't know, the war in Middle East. But the thing is, when you go down, when you go to the street, when you start to interviewing people in small towns and in cities, and then you realize that this is a very diverse and complex country. And it is also due because of migration. For example, if you see most of the migration in Florida is very conditioned by the Cuban community, right? But if you go to the other side of the country, if you go to California or Arizona, you're gonna find Mexicans. I mean, you won't find Cubans. So it's like this, the history of those countries and of those people really has an influence on how people interact socially in those areas. So for me, it has been amazing to see that, to see that difference. And it's something that you feel, it's not only that you perceive when you talk to people, it's something that you perceive even in the atmosphere, how people behave, how people say hello. It is completely different from depending on the area, depending on the city or on the state you are. So I think that's been very challenging, but also has been amazing for me. It's like to see that cultural diversity that you have here in the US.
Yeah. It is a very diverse country, of course. And well, speaking as someone born and raised in New York with family abroad in the Dominican Republic and in Colombia, I feel very fortunate, of course, to have been born and raised in New York City, the place that everybody wants to be in New York, right? But but I've been very fortunate to from the time I was born to have been in a very diverse environment where it's not difficult for me to interact with, people who are not like me. I have to, right?
You have to,
exactly. Yes, I have to. We all have to. And then I've spent time in other parts of the country that, of course, they're more insulated. And yeah, and it is what it is. But in the time, it's always been the time that I've been outside of my home, right?
Exactly.
Yes, that I really began to interact with people who weren't like me and who taught me so much more about the issues that they face, like you said, on the local level. The people on the street are the people who you meet on the street are the ones who will really get to teach you about so many different concerns. And I really appreciate your point as well about what you said about how the country is basically, it's essentially 50 different countries. It is.
It cannot is. Of course, it is. Actually, and you're saying something that is very interesting. What is home? What is home? Is home the place where you're grounded? Is home the place where your family is? Is home the place where you work? Is home, I mean, it's home is a concept that has many factors involved. It is a feeling, it is a place, it is the place where you say where you feel safe, where you have your stuff, where you raise your children. So I think that the fact that the US is built on the migration of so many generations of people coming from different contexts make a broader concept of home. That is something that I perceive as well here. For many migrants, home is the refugee camp where they can stay for a couple of days. And it's fair enough. They're walking. They don't have a home anymore. So if they can stay in a place with a shelter and with a hot food, of course, that's going to be home. So, yeah, I think that analyzing that, it's also very interesting, not only from the journalism, but also as a society. How generous is this country that can become the home of so many different people? I think it's amazing. Really.
It is amazing. I mean, as someone who is, the child of immigrants, right? I've always had one foot in the United States and one foot, in another country. Yes.
Exactly.
And and again, it's always difficult because what many people who are just whose families have been here for generations, what I've discovered, what they have trouble grasping is that when you've already had your roots here for generations and you don't have a connection to the motherland, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
It's like I've always had trouble understanding where I fit into American identity. And it's funny for people to hear that because they say, well, you were born in the United States. You were born in New York City. What are you talking about? And it's like, no, like we are all part of what people call, this melting pot, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
we're in this melting pot, but do I necessarily feel entirely comfortable or entirely accepted within this melting pot, especially when I don't have roots that have been here for generations,
Exactly.
hundreds of
Hmm.
years. Yeah. Especially when I find the majority of Americans also only speak one language. They only speak English. So that gets to another heart of it, right? Like, am I American enough? Even though I speak,
Right.
am I, even though I speak the language, will I be accepted? Because
Yeah.
I happen to speak another language, while other people absolutely don't have, a problem with it. But that definitely shapes, how we behave, how we interact, especially in different contexts. And the fact that this isn't one country, it's a country, right? But it's not a country with one cohesive identity. So you have to
Exactly.
navigate so many different social environments. And I think that you, being a journalist and getting the opportunity, of course, to travel and meet these people
Mm.
wherever you go as you explore these very complex issues, you're really like in the middle of that. You get.
Exactly. Of course. Of course. And actually, now you're saying, am I American enough? And I wonder, isn't it true that there are millions of people that speak Spanish here as
Mhm.
well? And they are Americans, just like you were born here. So that
Mhm.
is why I'm telling you that when I do an interview and I start asking people about their roots.
Mhm.
Where are you from? Where are your parents from? Because when you ask that question, you start realizing, okay, this guy was raised in Spanish, and maybe his family was fleeing from a dictatorship, or maybe was fleeing from I don't know, a natural disaster, and then you start like figuring out the profile of the person that you have in front of you. But the thing is that
Mhm.
this person is the result of a whole social process and a whole cultural process. And I think that one of the exercise that migrants are doing all the time is to um, is to live in their own culture, and the culture that you have in your heart, that you have in your soul, and adapting those tools to the environment where you are. You know you have to adapt to the environment that you are, because you know that you're not from that place. But at the same time, you have learnings, you have experiences that can be useful for the place where you are right now. So the
Mhm.
challenge is, how do you use that knowledge? How do you use that wisdom to get a better life in the place you are, but at the same time to contribute and to let others to benefit from that as well?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, all of these matters that we're discussing, right? They all intersect into, I suppose, a larger human rights framework, right? That's like we're talking about. It's people. We're talking about people. We're talking about their personhood, right? We're talking about, ultimately issues that come down to their feelings of comfort, right? Their feelings of safety in
Mm.
the society that they live in. And you have, this great experience covering human rights overall, but was that always your main focus when you were younger and you
Yeah.
were like, I want to be a writer or I want to be a journalist of some
Yeah,
kind?
sure. Of
Yeah,
course.
was it always the human rights issues themselves that attracted you? Because it's funny for me because fiction and poetry happened to be my first loves. Those were the things
Right.
that motivated me. I had this idea, and maybe I will one day, right? I would love to write the next great American novel. And then
Of course.
yes, and then I happened to get a nice little break. And here I am in this journalistic career, and it's made me actually an even better writer in a lot of capacities. But I haven't had this linear journey. So I'd love to know, like, what was it that you liked when you were a kid that made you
Yeah.
realize I want to do this, or I want to go maybe in this direction? Hmm.
You know that I have always had the feeling that I didn't choose journalists. Journalists chose me,
Hmm.
because I've been a journalist since I was a child. And
Hmm.
I didn't have I would say, probably the age of the consciousness to realize that, but I have always been concerned about social issues. I mean, about people, and what happens to people, and what happens especially to women and to children, because I really like to focus on the most vulnerable areas of the society in specific issues, right? That's why I care about the abortion bans in the US from the beginning, because I started thinking, okay, now women cannot make a decision on such a crucial issue like having a baby or not. So I started getting involved on this. But coming back to your question, I love nonfiction literature, something that, of course, I would love to do. But the thing is that over my career, what happened to me was that I started doing breaking news, as any other journalist, I would say. But over my career, I realized that I really wanted to do investigation. So I started doing so in my country. I actually was an investigative editor for two very important media outlets in Venezuela. I founded two investigative journalism units in Venezuela. And I realized that it was not only the fact of writing or doing the documentary, but it was also the whole process of understanding a situation and of building the confidence, the trust with a character or with a group of characters in order to tell the story. I really enjoy that process, when you get involved with a source and you start following the source. And well, after years of that, after years of finishing those stories, they still send me messages at Christmas or in my birthday. So I really like that process of seeing how people evolve. I would say that the investigative journalism and nonfiction narrative allow me to do so. And now in the BBC, I'm discovering the huge power of the documentary, the huge power of doing this in video, which is absolutely great, but it has a different, of course, a different format, but it has different requirements, because when you're writing, you can describe the scene and you can always delete a paragraph and delete the whole page if you want. And rebuild that again. But when you're doing a video, you really need to have the image that you that you're gonna need to do the final cut, So it's like learning a different language. I would say that video is a different language, but at the same time, it's another way to tell a good story. So I would say that in my process, it was fundamental to realize that I could do investigative journalism and to combine that with nonfiction literature and narratives. And that makes me, I'm passionate about that. That makes me super happy.
No, it's exciting. It's exciting. I mean, as someone who doesn't have experience making documentaries or making films, but who has such an appreciation for the film medium. I started out my career in film criticism, actually.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that was my thing. So if any journalists listening, if they want to have a conversation about art house films, foreign films, horror films, whatever they want to talk about,
Wow. Okay.
yes, I am their man. But I was open to change. I was open and adaptable to change. Whatever happened. I realized, wait a minute, I have a slew of different interests, different things that intrigue me. Yes, that I want to explore. And it sounds like the same thing with you, right? You have this opportunity here, especially in your capacity as a reporter for one of the most influential news organizations on the planet, right? To really just touch upon lots of, of course, hard-hitting issues, but lots of cool and exciting things,
Of course, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. It's an education every day, wouldn't you say?
Exactly. And that's something very important that we have in journalism. I would say that all the colleagues that I know would agree on this. And it's the fact that journalism allows you to learn every single day, because you have to research, you have to talk to people, you have to get informed on what you're going to talk about. So you learn all the time. I mean, sometimes I'm covering migration, but sometimes I'm covering the abortion bans. Last week, I was trying to get stories about Latinos in Lebanon because of the attacks from Israel. And when you see the perspective of someone that flee Venezuela and went to Lebanon 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and now is living a completely different context, or people from Mexico or from Argentina, I mean, you have to switch completely because you don't know what is really happening there until people tells you, okay, we have bombs every night, we don't have power, I don't know what's happening with my family. I mean, it's like you are really doing an exercise of empathy, but also learning about what people is living and how they face challenges. And I think that's amazing from journalism.
It is. I am 100% in agreement with you. That's what makes it very fun for me, right? To do these interviews, to speak with you, speak with other people
Right.
in this field, in our field, because it is about just it's daily learning. I feel like it's daily education. I feel like I walk away, right, just gaining so many fascinating insights, and I feel like I am a better and more well-rounded person,
Exactly.
yes, as a result. And I I want to thank you for for your time today, and because it's been so fun. Here we are just laughing and having a blast talking about how much we love journalism. And I would just love to hear from you, Valentina. What advice would you give to aspiring foreign correspondents, aspiring journalists who are looking to work in the United States or other foreign countries? What would you tell them right now?
Well, I would say that we have to follow our passion, whatever we are. I mean, in my case, my passion is social issues, is human rights, is the things that happen to people. For some others, it's science. For other people, might be politics. For others, it's economy. I think the best way to do this is to focus on what you like, to focus what makes you feel an emotion, and to try to transform that emotion into information or into a storytelling that can be brought to someone else. That's what I would say that is a good piece of advice. And also, I would say to be open to learn every single day, because this is a very challenging craft. We have to be open to make mistakes every day and to fix those mistakes and to not understand quite well the thing until we have read many papers or we have interviewed many people. And I would say that makes us humble, but also open enough to really understand others. So I think that could work for everything. I would say, not only for journalists, but that's the advices that I would give.
I think that we are ending here on a very important, it's an important note and a valuable note. And I hope that anyone who is watching or listening to us today takes all of this to heart. So I want to thank you again for your time, Valentina. This has been, of course, wonderful for me, and really enjoying connecting with you. And I really just appreciate the time that you spent with me here today on our Foreign Correspondents Talk series.
No, thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Thank you for giving me this floor to talk about the issues that I like. And I hope to see you in the next conversations, of course.
Absolutely.